bringing in Jim Gazzale from Legal Sports Report. Big news. We previewed it last week, Jim. We were on last Friday together about the Preakness. So Seize the Gray wins, and there's good news coming out of the race as well. They had dipped to a 3-year low in last year's handle, but it looks like it rebounded quite nicely.
Yeah, exactly, Mike. And we did touch on this briefly towards the end of the segment last week. And, of course, that was before the race. So we finally get the official handle figures for Preakness 2024. And all of the pools, the win, play, show wagering, exactas, trifectas, and even all of the multi-race wagers ending with the Preakness total handle hit $57.9 million. So a nice little rebound over last year, up 6% from last year when, like you just said, handle hit a 3-year low in 2023. Record handle still a bit off of that pace from 2021 when horse players put $68.7 million into the Preakness in 2021. Another bright spot that I found quite interesting in the lead up to the Preakness was the future bet. And the future wagers in horse racing are kind of few and far between. There's some sports books in Vegas that offer it, early on in the year and through the Kentucky Derby. There is obviously the Kentucky Derby future wager that Churchill Downs puts on. But this Preakness future wager is relatively new. This was just the second year for it. So $388,400 in total handle for the Preakness future bet this year. And that was up about 28% over last year. So a positive sign there. And I reached out to some people with the Preakness to ask them, basically, what do you think contributed to that increase in that future bet? And of course, they pointed towards the ability to just be involved in a future wager. We've seen the popularity of them grow in the sports betting landscape. So adding that to the horse betting wagering menu was a positive. The other thing that I thought was pretty interesting too is that they opened up the initial Preakness future wager back in February, kind of when maybe more casual horse players start paying attention to horse racing in the lead up to the Kentucky Derby. So some of the folks with the Preakness were telling me that they strategically opened it that early just so they could be in the conversation, in the mix as people are starting to pay attention to horse racing with the Kentucky Derby on the horizon. So just sort of the popularity of future bets in general, along with a little bit of strategic marketing, getting in the mix earlier on this year, helped boost that Preakness future betting handle.
And obviously also related to the race, the 8 horses ran this year, 7 last year. I think the Preakness sometimes is, it's the middle of the crown jewel races, and sometimes it gets overlooked by the Derby and the Belmont. But it is also fair to say that we've seen horses in the Preakness, especially from the Derby to the Preakness in the last few years. There's been a lot of shifting. There's been some favorites that have been scratched or not raced moving forward, saving them for Belmont. So I think some of those dynamics have obviously had an impact on the variability of the betting handle. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, you're absolutely right about that. And I think in the last couple of years, there's even been plenty of instances where the Derby horse, the Derby winner, doesn't even run back in the Preakness. So we saw the Derby winner, Mystic Dan, come back in the Preakness this year. He finished second. And he's right up the road from me here now in Saratoga, hopefully getting ready for the Belmont. So hopefully we see him again in the next couple weeks.
Great stuff. So let's move over to some state business. Again, Jim Gazzale from the Legal Sports Report. 3 Vermont sports betting apps. This is your tweet from yesterday morning. 3 Vermont sports betting apps won over $1.7 million in April and sent close to $532,000 back to the state in taxes. So an interesting bump for Vermont sports betting apps.
Yeah, Mike, I remember when you were on probably maybe 6 weeks ago, we touched on the amount of tourism that has
that's right.
happened in Vermont and kind of boosted their overall sports betting market as they launched back in January. So I was speaking to the regulators in Vermont, and they were telling me that initial week, that first full week in April 4th through the 10th, they received their highest tax revenue payment from the sports books during that week. It was the highest tax payment for them since February. And funny enough, that week featured the Final Four, obviously the national championship game, as well as the solar eclipse, like we talked about several weeks ago, Mike, and just this massive influx of tourists going to Vermont to see the solar eclipse, betting on the apps, and ultimately pumping that money through the sports books, and then those sports books are obviously having to send a bit of a tax payment back to the state. So they were quite pleased with what they saw in April. The Vermont sports betting regulators, they did tell me though it's difficult for them to say for sure yes, this tax payment was due to the tourists from coming into the state to see the solar eclipse. So I think we can make an educated guess and say that likely played a bit of a role, at least in that tax payment. One of the other interesting things too that I really enjoy about these Vermont sports betting reports is that they provide a lot of additional statistics that perhaps some of the other states don't exactly share. So in April, on the whole, 40,876 players during the month. So close to 41,000 people in Vermont, whether state residents or people from out of state, betting on sports through those three sports betting apps in Vermont, FanDuel, DraftKings, and Fanatics. They placed 738,000 bets with an average betting amount at $23. So just some additional context that we don't get from every state, which is of course why Vermont seems to be intriguing to me, I guess. But those tourism numbers from the solar eclipse, Final Four, just a lot of March Madness action kind of wrapping up in April, along with that tourism event, certainly helped the bottom line for state regulators.
And clearly a fellow New England state, right? Connecticut, a lot of UConn fans closer to the action, maybe living in Vermont or nearby in Massachusetts, and can get up to Vermont to place some bets. All right, last one for you. The Indiana sports betting handle returned to 2022 levels in April as bettors staked nearly $394 million during the month. The market dipped a bit as Ohio and Kentucky entered the betting market. I think we saw similar dips when New York entered. It impacted New Jersey. We see this anytime neighboring states open up a betting market. It's going to impact that state, correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mike. And I think this is also why I've been kind of drawn to this Indiana market, just kind of having, more competition on both sides. Ohio launched in early 2023, and we saw a couple of months of declines in handle in Indiana. And then they get hit with Kentucky launching its online market in the fall in late September. But they seem to have, regained their footing nicely. The handle figure said near $394 million, surpassing 2022 levels, which is kind of what we've been looking to see the market rebound to, and they did in April. So we'll see as they get into the dog days of summer here just how well that trend continues.
Great stuff from Jim Gazzale from Legal Sports Report.